Good afternoon, and this is a phase in the afternoon session where post lunch you're sleepy, now you're ready for tea. So I'm not too sure how long do we have time, but let me quickly run through. But before I get into the presentation, there are a few things which I just would like each of you to kind of just put in the back of the head. The first one is let us not to forget that traditional knowledge is dynamic. Just keep that in your mind. Traditional knowledge is dynamic. Traditional knowledge versus local knowledge. Just keep that in your mind. So, what is traditional knowledge? What is local knowledge? I think the sessions in the morning was all kind of hovering around that. Because some knowledge might not be traditional anymore, because time have changed. Hence, right now, it's just a local knowledge or a local practice. And the third thing is, I will not call my presentation a presentation, but more of a teaser. Because my presentation is actually a connection between what has been discussed in the morning and what we're going to take it forward from here till the next 1.5 days, one full days. Yeah. So I think that is the interesting. And in order to do that, what I've done is I've taken two projects, each very different from each other, but each of them have a very common thread, which is traditional knowledge. So basically, these are the two projects. So if you look at these two projects, one is actually talking only about agrarian landscape, which is basically your land use. And the second project talks only about, only means the focus is on aquatic. But the common thread here is indigenous knowledge. If you look at the first project, it's all about the Juming system, it's all about the land use systems. And the first project was effective till the next few days in Nagaland, Mizoram, and Meghalaya. The second project is effective in Nagaland, Manipur, Assam, and Meghalaya. So these are the two projects which I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to actually draw the learnings from the first project and see how can we pick up few learnings from the first project and then take it to the next project. So that's the basic idea of my presentation. Okay. Now, just look at it. These are the objectives of the first project. And if you look at the objectives without reading it, it's all about a few things. It's all about the land use. It's about traditional knowledge. It's about building capacities. And it's about working with policies. And this is, again, what we are trying to achieve with the NERAC project. So land use here, the end users here in the NERAC project are mostly people who are involved in fishing, involved in conservation of aquatic resources. In this project, there are people involved in June and fishing. Okay? Now, these are some of the activities which were supported under the agrarian project. And interestingly, it will dive into the next project, which is the NERAC project. Now, if you look at some of these, some of these policies are actually, when you go a little beyond the name of the policy, these policies are actually being formulated and revised from a holistic perspective. Now, I'll give you a small example. When you're talking about the Nagaland organic policy, you might feel that it has no correlation to anything aquatic. But if you go a little deeper, you will find that the very fact that the Nagaland organic policy discourages use of chemical fertilizers, that has in turn has an impact on the aquatic resources, the river systems. So I look at all these policies, and in fact, as a matter, not just me, but GIZ looks at all these policies very, very strongly from an intersectoral, cross-cutting perspective. So hence, that's the reason why I've kept some of these support activities which are supported. The Nagaland organic policy was supported. In fact, one of the cheerleaders sitting here with us here, Amba Jamir, who had spearheaded this whole formulation of the organic policy. Now, the other thing which again connects the two projects is this Nagaland State Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. This was again supported by the previous project, And what was interestingly in this revision of the Nagaland State Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan was a huge focus was again driven towards aquatic resources because that was the gap. It was also realized that, when we talk about biodiversity, the tendency is usually towards the fauna. There's a high tendency to focus on the fauna and a very, very low focus on the aquatic diversity. So this revision of the State Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan gave us an excellent entry into pushing this importance of aquatic diversity into the list. Subsequent to that, we were also requested by the government of Nagaland, kindly relook at the People's Biodiversity Register. Then we kind of jumped into it with the understanding that here's again an excellent opportunity to realign the People's Biodiversity Register so that it also impacts and has some documentation about the aquatic diversity. Because if you all know, if you look at the People's Biodiversity Register, it is again 98% focus on fauna and medicinal plants and the flora. Very, very little documentation is on the aquatic diversity. So that gives us an opportunity. Now, the other aspect of this whole series of policy advocacy, policy advice was done with the perspective that, sometimes it's good to think local. But we are now in a phase where we have to think locally and act globally. So we also need to kind of be aware of all these international conventions to see whether our policies are in tune with these international conventions. So that also was incorporated in these revisions of some of these policies. Now, like I said, it's not a presentation, it's just a teaser because these points are going to be dealt a lot more deeper when we go to the panel discussion. But what has been the learning? The learning from the Agrarian Focus Project. We all know, and it's been reiterated in the morning, that we are in a region of a biodiversity hotspot, both in terms of flora and fauna. So we are sitting in that treasure. Now, we also need to understand that because we are given this treasure, it also comes with a number of challenges. And one of the key challenges which I see could also be an opportunity is most of these resources in the region is actually under the custodians of the community. I cite a small example. In the state where I come from, in Meghalaya, you would be quite surprised that the forest department, the formal institution, controls just 6% of the entire forest and natural resources in the state. 6%. And this 6% is just your national parks and sanctuaries. Now, the entire remaining percent is with the community, which means your forests, your river ecosystems, your resources associated with these two ecosystems is all in the hands of the community. So it's both a challenge and it's also an opportunity. So that was the other learning which we drew from the district. Now, we also know the debate in the morning was the national PCCF just said, give me data. You can be happy with traditional knowledge, but where's the data? We also know on the other side of the coin is all this whole richness of the traditional system, which we are very rich. But like some of you said, this rich traditional knowledge also needs to be validated. And this rich traditional knowledge also needs to be understood that it's a dynamic process. So what could be rich 30 years back might not be rich now anymore. It was rich 30 years back because there were 30, 50 years back because there was no impact of climate change. It's no longer relevant now because we have the impact of climate change, which makes the knowledge not relevant anymore. So I think these are some of the learnings in this thing. Now, because these communities can manage these resources, both in terms of forests and in terms of rivers, ecosystems, and all the other resources, there have been excellent case studies of community initiatives. And when I use the word community here, these are traditional community initiatives. I cite two examples. The community fish sanctuaries, which are prevalent in Meghalaya, especially in Garo Hills. These were all traditional systems which kind of work towards conserving, like Dr. Pandey was saying, no fishing allowed during the rainy seasons. There are fish sanctuaries, designated fish sanctuaries, so everything related, everything geared towards conservation of the aquatic ecosystem. And somebody in the morning mentioned that it's not only the fish which gets conserved, it's the diversity within that system which gets conserved. So a lot of people in the morning, their favorite species was fish. My favorite species was dragonfly. But if you eat all the fish, I will not survive. The dragonfly will not survive. So we also need to understand from that perspective, world conservation. And all these country initiatives, you go a step higher, a step wider. If you look at the agroforestry land use, which is actually the Joom system. I mean, the Joom system itself is an agroforestry system. Now, nowhere in the system would they say that, okay, we will only talk about land. We're not going to talk about water. When we're going to talk about Joom, we're not going to talk about rivers. Everything is integrated. So this is something where we also need to respect and to take cognizance of. That in the community thinking, it's the system. It's only when we start coming to a room like this, or when we go to a room of the line department, that we start compartmentalizing. In the community, there's nothing like a forest department. Believe me, in the community, there's nothing like a fishery department. In the community is the land use. So I think this also needs to be taken into account. Then also there's a need to re-emphasize, and this I specifically use it as a marker, is need to re-emphasize conservation of indigenous crop. I think NESFAS is here. They've been working a lot on indigenous crops and forgotten crops. So this was a big learning for us from the previous project, which again has a connection to how do we do it. If you're going to conserve crops, what is the model we're going to use to conserve a particular aquatic species? Then, to me personally, the biggest learning was we have been too complacent with the roles and responsibility and authority of the BMCs. We forgot about the BMCs. And I think it's high time, the biodiversity management committees, sorry, the short form, I think it's high time that we need to pick them up. Because my learning has been that you have a traditional system. Call it what you may, indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, whatever, call it. You have this box of traditional system. You have the formal system, which is the government system. Now, to my understanding, of an excellent channel which can help us work between the traditional system, which is informal, and the formal system, which is the forest department and all government programs and scheme, is actually the BMCs. The BMCs are actually members of the tradition who have been given the mandate and responsibility authorized by the formal system. So I think to me, this was a big learning. And because of this realization, what we started doing was, under the project, was to actually start talking about why the BMCs. And how can the BMCs help in aquatic resource management? And these are some of what I just noted. I mean, the list is not exhaustive. But some of the pointers which why the BMCs. And if you look at the BMCs, they were actually identified and actually promoted very strongly in the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan. They were sanctified. They have actually, I mean, you'll be quite surprised. The BMC has both the statutory authority and they are legally recognized. Now you tell me which institution in the traditional system has this kind of an authority. So we need to take advantage of it. We need to push it forward. And the BMCs have been seen as a support effective implementation of state policy. Now, but you have an institution of the Biodiversity Management Committee. Obviously, you will need to work with them. So there's definitely a lack of understanding of what my role is as a BMC member. What am I responsible for? What authority do I have? In fact, they do have a lot of authority. Later, you will see. So there's a need for them to realize, there's a need for us to build a capacity so that we can effectively use, I mean, I won't use the word use, but to invite their participation in aquatic conservation. Now, just quickly running through this without, this is the first role of BMCs. The second role of BMCs, to document. The third role is their custodian. So these are the three major roles of the BMCs. What are they being put in call for to do? The fourth role. Now, you can imagine my friends who spoke just before me were members of the BMC. Now, imagine if they understood this role with a legal backing from the government system. We are on the right path. That's my biggest idea. Yeah. Now, I'll skip all this. So what we started doing was we started investing our time and our resources to seriously look at the role of BMCs. So this was actually done. These are members of our BMCs who've been called to start talking and negotiating and then discussing with them about the roles and responsibilities. And what we did was we went one step ahead. And this is again a feedback which we got from any BMC members across the state and across the region is, yeah, we know what is our responsibility, but where's the resources? Yeah, we know what we have to do, but we have nothing to do. There's no money, there's no resources. So we said, okay, under the NERA project, we will support you. We will support what is relevant for you at your BMC level. The project will support that. We'll document the learning from that so that we can then now project to the government, here's a working model. So there's a working model for the need to train BMCs, which we intend to bring out these training manuals and the awareness materials. Here's a model of how do you work with BMCs addressing their local issues, financially and also technically. So the idea is basically that. So what we did was we worked with them, we got them together, discussed about the roles and responsibility, and also started discussing about what is relevant to their BMC level. And we came up with these, some of the ideas. There's a, pardon me for the names, then you, BMC, there's Chhaya BMC, there's Kohima BMCs, and all of them have their own local area-specific issues. So this is our next step. From here onwards, we are going to support them and document the learnings, document the challenges and all that, and bring up a model which can then be presented to the state policy. So I think that ends my presentation with the last 4 bullets. Support the BMC, create implementation models, share learnings and division of the mistake, and also develop training and hand-holding modules so that we can then really operate with the biodiversity management committee. So that ends my, not to call a presentation, but to take you to the next step, which is this, what Chhaya is going to talk about. Yeah, thank you.